Good morning, class. It's so great to be back here. I hope you've had a wonderful weekend. I actually went to a small wedding, outdoor wedding this weekend for the first time in like a year and a half, seeing people that I hadn't seen for a long time. So that was really exciting. And, I hope that your lives are slowly returning back to a different kind of normal, being able to see people you haven't and do things that you maybe haven't have been limited to do. So I hope you're doing really great. I'm really excited to talk with you this week about, we're approaching the end of the semester, so thinking about how your projects that you've worked so terribly hard on, thought carefully about, reflected upon, and began to sort of research. From last week, you did some paraphrasing activities that made you think about, what do I do when I have this material and how do I incorporate it into my writing? Do I directly quote from this article? Do I paraphrase and kind of state it in my own words? And typically paraphrases are the most sort of sophisticated way of relaying information and can be a lot of, there's a lot of kind of strategy, a lot of skill with doing that. So thanks for practicing that with me. As we approach the end of the week, end of our course, you'll see that we're already on week 14. So what we're going to be doing is continuing our work on those letters to the alderman, which again, we're doing kind of a mock letter in class. And if you decide to send those after class, that's perfectly fine with me. You don't have to do that as part of our class, but I just wanted you to know that we're writing for a very specific audience. And I think it's really important that we're writing to enact change, that we're actually going to work on projects that may benefit the community. So not only is your research kind of important at the school level at COD, but that your work is going to have some kind or could have some impact beyond our classroom. So I hope that you find that really valuable, that this class asks you to do things that have a high impact, that have practical application, and that will help you think about how to continue to be one of these really active citizens in the years to come. You do have till the end of today to finish up your comments on our reading from last week about the community groups that push this idea to revitalize some of Chicago's neighborhoods that have these empty plots of land that have remained kind of this wasteland for a long time, and some of the ideas and potential that people have seen that could be used, can be constructed on this land to help the nearby local population. I wanted to hit some highlights. One of the things I really liked about this article is that it uses a community in New York as a parallel community, and that's something that we did earlier in this class, thinking about parallel communities. What have other communities, what have other cities done that address your project, and how have they done that successfully? So it's always great to learn and kind of glean from what others have done to forward your own project. One of the sections that I really liked, the conversation that was happening, really fruitful, was thinking about this idea of needing to build a community. You cannot rebuild a community where there are hundreds of vacant lots and only do 10 homes. So thinking about the scale of this project, they want to really reconstruct or construct 1,000 homes. The scale of this project is quite large. And Kayla says, I think that Ray's comment on critical mass is that there needs to be a mass of people that need to live in these homes. You need a foundation of others that already live there to start the resurrection of a community. Absolutely. And then Chris followed up by saying, especially when considering that you need a demand of potential buyers to help push this idea of building homes. So if there's no demand, then it would be pointless to waste time building homes that no one would buy. And then Bethany, you pointed out, you said, I feel as if a major concern could be the attention to detail that may be lost when mass producing these homes. I thought that was a really interesting point. So if we're going to move from 10 homes to 1,000 homes, you said, I know that it's not common for builders in neighborhoods to build many houses at once, but if the goal is 1,000 homes in a short amount of time for as low a price as possible, will the quality of the home be compromised? This is a great idea, but if you are providing these families with houses that immediately have issues, these actions are in vain. And in fact, in the Chicago Tribune this weekend, there's a community that's striking, that lives in apartment communities and saying, we want better living conditions. There's mold. There's other kinds of structural problems with the places that they're living. So thinking about the structures, how they're being constructed, and who's going to be able to purchase these homes is a very practical and I think a good question to ask. And Chris, you said it's a reasonable concern in my opinion, since the quality of the materials would be the first to be sacrificed in order to keep prices down. One other thing to think about too is, Building homes is one side of the equation. You have to have qualified buyers on the other side of the equation. So there's a whole other kind of slew of issues and questions that have to be kind of ironed out before creating this this project, thinking about who's going to purchase these homes. A lot comes with that. They said educating the sort of home buyers. How do they get loans to do this? How do we put a down payment on? How do we save money, improve credit scores? They also need to work with banks and lenders to create mortgages. So, this project is very complex, but also has a large team of members and volunteers working on this project. So, again, just something to think about how the scale of the project can become quite large. With your projects, you're doing something that I think in your communities is very much achievable at the level of, maybe between 1 to 5 people working together. In Unit 14, we're going to continue to work on communicating our projects. So thinking about who exactly is this discourse community? What does it mean to write to an alderman? What does it mean? What are some of the conventions, and how do we have to explain our projects in such a way that it outlines some of the problems, some of the potential solutions, and really engages and asks that alderman to respond and take action, to take your project seriously. So this week we're going to continue to create research print or digital texts, and then use suitable methods of citation as we fill out the second half of this letter. I only had you write the first half last week. And that's not due till the end of the day today, I believe, Monday. So if you haven't already written the first half, that's okay. Please get that to me by the end of the evening. I also wanted to focus briefly, last week we talked about paraphrasing. Now, you don't have to have quotation marks around it, but you do have to cite a paraphrase, right? We have to have the author's last name and the year that source was published, if we're using a secondary source, for example. With direct quotations, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about what that means. It means that you have to include quotation marks around the material that you're using the exact words and sentences from the source. It also requires a citation. While I'm not going to read through this entire section, I hope that you have time to do that, and take time to kind of consider the different kind of variations and essential parts of a direct quotation, how to integrate quotations into your own language. I do want to point out, deciphering whether I paraphrase material or directly quote it. Now, last week we talked about paraphrasing as a way in which we take someone else's information, someone else's ideas, and we rephrase them. We restate them in our own words, because whatever's being said can be rephrased. There's nothing too essential in the actual structures of that sentence or that paragraph that need to be duplicated exactly. Now, when we're quoting, it's quite the opposite. You quote when you want to discuss the actual language of a text. Say, for example, the text has some words, phrases that you want to duplicate directly or exactly. That's when you'll quote. You also quote when you're discussing an author's position or theory and you plan to discuss the wording. Again, thinking about specific words or phrases. When you risk losing the essence of the author's ideas in the transition from her words to your own, or when you want to appeal to the authority of the author, using his or her words will emphasize that authority. So if that author is someone well known in the field, that's really important to have that author's words embedded right in your text. Now, how do you quote directly? Remember that whenever you're using someone else's words exactly, you'll put quotation marks at the beginning of when that passage starts and right after the last word ends. You'll notice that the citation for that direct quotation, which I do want you to include in your letters, will be the author's last name, comma, the year of the publication, and then the page P period or paragraph number. Sometimes if there's no page numbers, you'll abbreviate paragraph PARA period, and then the number. So you'll have to decide if yours has page numbers, your source has page numbers, put P period. And if it doesn't, sometimes you can count the number of paragraphs. If it doesn't make sense to count the number of paragraphs because you're not using a web page, then just skip it. But hopefully there's a page number associated with that particular quotation. Please read through the rest of this section. I talk about what a quotation sandwich is, where you introduce a quotation, you cite it and explain it, avoiding ever dropping the quotation in just by itself. I give you some examples of some quotation conventions, that the quotation and punctuation mark always comes inside of the quotation marks, not after it. So that's just a brief overview of how to quote directly. As you continue to draft your letters this week, I have made this assignment your next part of this draft, the second half of your letter, worth 50 points because you're actually covering a little bit more material here. As I get you comments on your first half of the letters that you might still be submitting later today, the second half of the letter, I don't need you to duplicate the first part because I've already seen that. The second part, I'd like you to create just as a journal entry. You can start composing it or copy and paste your document that you've been working on by clicking here. I'd like you to turn this second part in by Friday, this coming Friday, since we're coming to a close in our class. I want to make sure I can get you all enough feedback. I want you to pick up on this question. This is the third question from part one, which asks you to integrate some evidence. And so since this is a research class, I'm really going to put a heavy emphasis on the fact that I need to have some kind of primary and secondary source evidence that really supports this need for improvement or a change. And you've all collected that information in your excellent annotated bibliographies. So you can pull from that information. You could also pull from your primary source research, which includes photographs, right? You can feel free to include photographs. That would be wonderful. Or images. You can also include any kinds of materials that you've collected on your own primary research, right? Any surveys you've taken, any comments from the community that you've gathered. I want you to describe what any changes will mean to you and to others, specifically positive or negative effects the decision will have on you personally or those you represent, which will make your argument more persuasive. I'd also like you to describe what actions you hope the alderman may take, whether it's supporting a position, whether it's presenting this idea to the board, whether it's helping you find or establish more connections so that your project can take flight. If you have time and are committed, you'll have to decide, in the next 2 weeks if you wanted to continue work on this project. A lot of you should, because you're doing some great work here, and I want you to, see the change to really, you're so close to coming to that point where you can actually be able to see that change enacted in your community. You might ask, I'm more than willing to explore the various options in helping make our community a safer place to live. You might just offer that to see if the alderman can say, well, yeah, that I can do this part if you can complete this part. I would like you to include a references list. So again, a references list is a list of any of the sources that you've included in your letter. So if you're quoting from secondary sources, those secondary sources you probably have citations from your annotated bibliography. So feel free to copy and paste those references into a section so that your alderman actually can go back and look through some of those sources and know that you're taking this research really seriously. The references list is also ordered in alphabetical order. And then simply close and sign your letter. So, checking your spelling and grammar is always important, but that's something I can help you out with too. And so just proofreading before you submit your work. And we're really going to get these letters to look really polished, and I'm so excited to see what's going to come of these. Next week we'll be sharing these letters with the rest of your peers and giving you some time to actually record yourself talking about your projects so that we can all get a sense of the awesome work that you guys have been doing this semester. I'm really, really impressed with the kinds of ideas that you've had and the kinds of research you've compiled that supports such a local effort. So please remember, this week for points, you have two things: drafting the second part of your letter, and then also adding some feedback to this document called A Garden is the Front Line in the Fight Against Racial Inequality and Disease. It's actually an article that talks about change that's being made in Minnesota. So it's about supplying specific kinds of food to a community that has needs a dietary change. So the co-founder is actually a group called Appetite for Change, and I know that I'm very well aware that you guys are working on projects on your own without kind of the support of a larger group, but you can kind of see what happens when community comes together as well. The last thing is, I think you should have received an email, at least that's what they told me, in your COD email about completing an online course evaluation. I'd be really grateful for you to provide me some feedback on your experience in this online class as you work through your community projects. And there should be a link, and I look forward to kind of reading your feedback after the end of this semester closes. But for this week, keep pushing through. You're doing such great work on your letters. You're doing such great work with your research, and I'll be giving you feedback shortly. So keep looking, keep checking back for feedback, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you guys so much.